Am I doing better at making thumbnails for videos? I'm trying to. Oh gosh, every time there's someone who has a video that talks about the truth, it's usually garbage, and is what I found. But it seems to attract a lot of clicks and views. So I'm like, well, when in Rome, I guess this is the thing that YouTube does now. So you have to have like clickbait thumbnails and clickbait titles. Anyway, yeah, today we're going to learn about this weird plant. We're going to learn the truth about that weird plant. But first, I just wanted to point out I just got a new book. It's My Life, a record of events and opinion from Alfred Russel Wallace. And for those who don't know, Wallace co-discovered natural selection with Darwin. Darwin was working on his book, and Wallace actually wrote him a letter where he described the process of natural selection and this new idea that he had. He was asking Darwin what he thought of it, because I guess there was some word on the street that Darwin was interested in ideas about evolution, and that kind of like jolted Darwin and got him excited that he should probably participate or quickly publish his book. So it's really interesting that the theory of evolution by natural selection was actually discovered independently by two different people. And probably if it weren't for Darwin or Wallace, it would have been discovered again. What I think had happened is that we were in we were just in a big, we were at this moment in history when there was so much biodiversity that was understood and collected. It was in museums, and then people were going around and traveling around the world. That the theory of evolution was just inevitable. It was just going to be understood. What evolution requires is an understanding of biodiversity, and that biodiversity was being discovered at this time. So Wallace discovered it, Darwin discovered it. Darwin ended up writing a better book about it. He really, really fleshed out the idea, and so he's the one that history has remembered. It's also probably because of his wealth and so on. Wallace, I haven't read the book yet, but I'm pretty sure he was fairly like uneducated, or he wasn't like officially educated. So he was well read, but he didn't like have a doctorate degree or something. And Darwin, on the other hand, was really well connected within the scientific community, so he was able to do a lot more in reaching the scientific community. So that's interesting. But the reason I bought this book is because I've been hearing a lot of people complain that we don't give Wallace enough credit for his contribution to the theory of evolution. And so I got this book, and it's really funny because this book itself, like, you can't really see in the screen here, but this photograph of Wallace is all pixelated. So even like the book about him that I paid money for, they couldn't trouble themselves to like go and actually get a high quality like version of his photograph for the cover of the book. They just apparently took it off Wikipedia or something. So I thought that was funny. It really is true that this guy is not getting enough credit for his discovery. So anyway, that's a tangent. Today, we want to discover what's going on with this plant here. So I've got some pictures of it, just a refresher, especially for anyone who may have not seen the video, the first part of this series. So I found this plant growing in, most of it was growing out of water. This particular one was growing out of a bit of a pond that had dried up. So it had been growing in water, but the water receded. And it's a really, really interesting plant. It's got these, so I'm showing you the spike ball here. So these are all the seeds, and they've already been fertilized. They've already been pollinated. And then here we see what it looks like when it's not so mature. You've got all those seeds that are starting to bud out there, and you have all of these little flower balls. And what I had concluded, my tentative conclusion in the field, one of the things that we want to try and figure out here is, how does this thing reproduce? Are each of these little orbs, are they going to turn into a spiky ball full of seeds? or are those male flowers and these are the female flowers? So that was one of the questions that we had. And in the field there, I had concluded that all of these must turn into seed pods. And I did start to doubt that later when I got home and started looking at all the footage. And then, so here's what one of these things looks like early on. And my thought was that these actually turn into those spikes. The other possibility is that these might just have pollen and the spike balls might just be the female part of the plant. So it's got a male flower and a female flower. Here we have those puffball flowers, the flowers when they're still in puffball form. The flower clusters, I should say. So, yes, the question is, what species is this? Are its flowers hermaphroditic? So is each flower both male and female, or are some male and some female? That's also common in plants. And then the third question that I asked the audience is, will spike husks open to drop seeds, or will the seed cluster simply break apart? So those are the questions that I had there. Feel free to, chime in on the comments here as we're going along. I'm going to pull up the video because there was a lot of comments that people left on that video itself. So here is the video from last week. And down here, we had a lot of people responding to my 3 questions. Biophile. I don't know if Biophile is a guy or gal, but Biophile tells us that they are a botanist and that they have not looked this up, because that was the thing. You can't look it up. You can't Google it. You got to just know off the top of your head. If you happen to know what species this is, awesome, off the top of your head. And Biophile gives us a guess. And one of the most interesting things said here, let me just read this part down here. Definitely distinct male and female flowers. The fluffy ones are male. The spiky ones are female. The female flowers have a divided stigma, the white spikes which drop off, which means they probably have 2 carpels per flower in the cluster. Probably only 1 seed develops in each, though. So that was pretty interesting. And then they also say that they probably, the seed capsules probably don't open up and drop their seeds when they're ready. The whole thing just probably breaks apart. And so that was interesting. And we have some other people giving conflicting guesses here. So I want to go through some of these, well, most of them here. Karen says, I have other plants that flower first, then develop seed pods or clusters like this one. I got a complaint. Dude, high pass filter. I'm listening on my home audio system and the wind noise makes the walls shake. So first off, thanks for the feedback. I probably should have done a little bit more to edit that audio. But also, I don't you think it's kind of interesting that I was out in the wilderness on a warm, calm summer day, and that calm summer breeze went through my little microphone on my camera and was transmitted to your house and actually shook the walls of your house. That little gentle summer breeze made your house shake and caused you a little bit of suffering, triggering you to write that comment. I just think that's somehow interesting. So anyway. We got another comment. I don't know if they're being serious or if this is a joke. I think Jesus did it. That doesn't really respond to my questions, the things there at all. Then we got a quote from a book here about the morning star, which is a little bit off topic. Derek writes, more interestingly, how are the seeds dispersed? Not wind, not edible, not caught on animal fur, waterborne, but looks very congested in the locality. So that's a really good thing to think about. Like, how are these spiky seeds passed around? I did get a couple people saying that maybe the spikes suggested they are caught in fur. Actually, okay, Jay right below says the fact that the seeds are on a tall stalk and are covered with spikes suggests to me that they get caught in the fur of animals like stinging nettles. The animals then clean themselves near a water source, possibly by getting in the water. Because the seeds are so big, I don't think that's likely. I mean, they're huge, and the spikes are actually, they're not very sharp. Let me pull up the slides again. If I show you the images here, that you can see that those spikes really couldn't get caught in anything's fur, I don't think. So I don't think that that's possible. I don't know if there's, this fruit is edible. I have looked things up now, by the way. I am now informed with legitimate information, but I'm not sure. I really didn't hear much I did hear that some birds will eat the seeds, but I don't know if the fruit around the seeds is what they're after, or if they're after the seeds themselves. It's kind of interesting. So there certainly is a little bit of animal dispersal going on here, but we'll see what the main dispersal source is in a moment. So back to YouTube comments. More interestingly, how are the seeds dispersed? Okay, we already read that. Okay. My guess is that it is a species of water chestnut, and the seed is spread by sticking to waterfowl. Need some more data. I'm thinking the spike ball is the pollinated seed-bearing part of the plant. They don't look like they would attach to animals to be carried away, but maybe they dissuade animals from eating the seeds. Yeah, I don't think that's even possible. I think the spike, I think, is just kind of a remnant of the flowering part. I think of this like, like the little part on the end of an apple, the little flowery looking part on the end of an apple. That's just the remains of the flower. I think that's what the spikes are in this case. They're just the remains of the flower. I don't know that they're really an adaptation to stop predation or anything. I don't know. Might be the Sparganium erectum, but it seems that there are many subspecies of similar plant. You are very close, by the way. It's it's pollination until pollen tube reaches the ovum, then it's fertilization. Given the yellow granular looking tips and the bee, so remember in the video there's a bee that was collecting pollen from those flowers. The flowers certainly seem to have pollen-producing aspect, and given that we have pretty clear evidence of insect pollination and that occurs when insects already covered in pollen are attracted to get more from another flower and transfer it, I would agree that the flowers have both male and female components. So this guy is in conflict with the botanist who chimed in earlier. And this guy is thinking along the lines that I was thinking of originally, which I started to doubt later on when I was looking at the footage. As to the round balls, I had originally thought that they were fertile flowers, having dropped their petals, stamen, etc. But after seeing the semi-spike ball phase with some petals still attached, I don't know what to think. As for the spike balls themselves, I wonder if they may use the type of seed dispersal that uses heat on incredibly hot days to cause them to burst and throw the seeds widely. I also wonder if there is any notable animals attracted to them that the spikes may be to inhibit. I want to just comment on that real quick. There actually were, I didn't get footage of them, but there was a plant right next to this plant. It had like a bean type stalk on it, and those ones are the ones that if you touch them, they weren't quite ready, which is one of the reasons I didn't film it. But if you hit them, they burst open and the seeds fling everywhere. And it's really cool. There's a lot of plants that do this. When the seed pod dries, it dries in a way that it causes tension, so that if you just barely bump it, the seeds explode all over the place. That's a really cool adaptation for seed dispersal. And these ones do not do that, however, as we'll find out in just a moment. Yeah, I got some more confirmation. Sparganium erectum. Sparganium, the genus, is actually correct, it turns out. But that species is fairly unlikely that that's what I'm finding. I actually still don't have 100% certainty but actually I'm sure that it's not the erectum species now. But we'll go into that in a moment. Is it just coincidence that the spiky seed things you found were all near the base of the stem? No, it's not, actually. While the pollen and flowers were further out, because it does seem likely to me that those pollen areas at the very ends would develop into the presumably heavy seeds. Sorry, it doesn't seem likely. But I know nothing about this topic, so yeah. So you were in the position that I was in early on. Like I wasn't sure. Aki Sci Channel comments. He's given me species possibilities. And by the way, it seems to me that you looked this up, my friend. I know you said that you just learned about this in 7th grade in plant reproduction, but I find it suspicious that they would have taught you the specific species names of plants that this might be. But you say that you think it's a bur-reed, and it's not hermaphroditic in the sense that the flowers are both male and female. You think that it's monoecious. So you got female and male separate flowers, but on the same plant. So the plant itself is hermaphroditic, but the flowers are not. Yeah. Here. Solana. I'm horrible pronouncing people's names. I apologize. I'm also really bad at pronouncing the scientific names, as has been pointed out many times on this channel. I've never seen this plant before. It reminds me somewhat of sedges. They have separate male and female flowers and create spiky seed pods. This is similar to those, yeah. I think the big fluffy flowers the bee was visiting were male flowers. The female flowers are the ones that are the tiny spike balls with the pollen receptors. Yes, that's a very good hypothesis. I think the spiky ball will stay attached to the plant. Each spike will split open, and one seed will fall out of each spike. Let's see. Thanks. First thing I did was crack open my field guide to wildflowers in North America. I'm going to consider that cheating, so I'm going to skip over that one. But yeah, that person was correct. They found it in a book, not in Google. And I didn't specifically mention not to use books. I said not to use Google. So, I mean, I guess, yeah, I'm going to consider that cheating, but we'll not intentional cheating. Sorry. Some of these are too long for me to read. But this one here, we had quite a few people talk about trees that are doing this. And of course, this is not a tree. It's not really closely related. It was I think people are saying it was a gum tree, and it's not, but it is very, very similar in seed pods. They do look very similar, and I think that's just convergence. Let's see. Seems the spike flowers have. We're getting repetitive here now, so I think it's fair to just dig into what it was that I found. And let me start that by I've got a little video that I filmed. I actually found one of the seed pods that was ready to, basically ready to go. Let me look real quick if I got any questions in the live comments here. We got more people watching. Good. Let me go to my slides. This is where I stored the video for you all. So again, here's my pictures. So here, we finally found one that is ready to fall apart. So yeah, the seeds, they just crumble into the water. Individual seeds look like that. So yeah, they just dangle over the water, drop in, float away. They're fairly soft and filled with air at this point. So they float. Here. So that's cool. That answers our question. Our third question, will the spike husks open and drop seeds, or will the seed cluster simply break apart? So that question is answered. They just kind of break apart. And it reminded me a lot of corn on the cob, but the cob was just a little tiny sphere in the middle. So that, I don't know, that was kind of neat. So it's individual kernels, and they just fall apart when they're ready. So that's how this plant works. That's how its seeds are dispersed. And when I was reading about this online, this whole genus, the seeds are dispersed through the water. They float around. They're dispersed that way. They'll eventually sink, and they can stay submerged for, I think it's like up to 5 years before they actually grow. They're triggered to grow by the right amount of sun. So they're underwater, and there has to be the right amount of sunlight to trigger them to grow, and they can stay underwater without the water damaging them for up to 5 years. This was research done because this species is actually a problem for people who are growing rice. It'll actually grow and choke out the rice. So people who are trying to deal with this plant, they're trying to study everything about how it works. And that's where I got all the really cool information about how this thing works. It's people trying to kill it, which is interesting. This is how we learn about whenever we know a lot about an individual species, it's usually because we've been at war with it for one reason or another, which, I don't know, maybe that's sad, maybe that's interesting. It's just how it is. Okay. So I made a video of me trying to figure out what kind of plant this was. And I don't know how interesting this is going to be to people. Let me just go ahead and play it here. I am actually going to try and figure out. I'm going to turn the volume up here. What type of plant that is using a Google image search. This is the first thing that I do whenever I see a weird animal or plant. I know there are apps nowadays that you can get for your phone. You usually have to pay for them, but where you can just take a picture of a plant and it will identify it. I don't have one of those. I'm not that cool. So I just go here and I'm going to type in I should point out, I just pause it. I should point out that you actually don't need one of those apps now. Google Glass can do it. I should have just uploaded photos that I had taken. Or is it Google Glass? Google Lens, I think is what it's called. So you can actually just upload your own pictures. And I could have, look, there's actually a little camera icon right there. I could have just uploaded my own picture and Google would try to ID the plant for me, but I didn't do that. I'm using the old school method here, where I'm just going through doing a Google search. So, and this, by the way, I do think that this might be helpful for people to see how I do Google searches, because I have to do this all the time for obscure things because I teach biology. And a lot of the things that I'm interested in, a lot of the questions that I have, I'll just see something and I'll have a question about it and I won't have any of the vocabulary. And so I do a lot of Google image searching and just browsing online. And so maybe I think I will show you the rest of this video, even though I did this in sort of an inefficient way, because it'll just show you my chaotic method for doing this. So, aquatic plant spike seeds, and see what comes up here. I think that's too general. Nothing here really does it for me. That's too general. Well, it also looked at, it had this, the morning star, which, let me try typing in morning star. That looks similar. Ooh, there we go. That looks exactly like what we're looking for. Let me. So anyway, that was me starting out. What I usually try and do when I'm googling is I just try to basically Google is so good right now that if you just word things how you would word it, if you were just trying to describe what you saw to someone else, just type that into Google and you will most likely find it. So, I noticed these things look like the Morning Star mace weapons that the Germans used to use. And so I just assumed that other people would describe it that way as well. And it was adding that little word Morning Star that allowed me to find this plant. I eventually found the species, I eventually ended up finding the Wikipedia page for the genus, and I was able to go through all the different little Wikipedia pages and find photos that looked most like the species that I was looking into, and then I was able to look that species up in the scientific literature and learn all sorts of things about it. And the species that I ended up finding this, and I'm not 100% sure that I'm right, but I'm close to 100% sure at this point, because I actually got descriptions of this plant and how to distinguish it from the plants that are most common to it. I was able to find some really cool information for figuring out what species this is. And it turns out that the species is Sparganium eurycarpum. That is the species. So the common name is the giant bur-reed. So both of these questions have now been solved. What species is it? Will a spike husk open to drop seeds, or will the seed cluster simply break apart? But what about its flowers? Are the flowers hermaphroditic? Will each one of those little here, let me go back to the photos here. Will each one of these will this ball here turn into a spike ball? So here's, will it go from this to something that looks like this to something that looks like this? Is that the progression? Or is this little puffy ball a completely different type of flower than this one here, or than this one here? And the answer is they are different flowers. This species has both male flowers and female flowers. They're actually flower clusters. So each of these is the pistil, so the female part, a female flower. So each of these, here you actually have the ends of the flower are still on there. So these little white tips here, those can receive pollen, and when they do, the egg cell inside will be fertilized. The little seed inside will be fertilized, and they will develop. So this is what we're seeing here is actually the ovary of the flower, the fruit of the flower. It's got that seed inside that's starting to grow now that it's been fertilized, and eventually you get to a giant seed cluster like this. So that means that these male flowers here, these are the what do you call them, the stamen here, these just produce pollen, and that's it. And there's I ended up finding this in the literature, but everybody who mentioned this, I couldn't actually get a really good description of this online. I would have had to go to the library, and the library in my city didn't have the book that I needed, because there actually is a full detailed description of this plant, of its anatomy, of its flowers, that's from like the 1800s, and it's a pretty hard book to find, and it's not online. But I did find a bunch of scientific papers that were referring to it, and then they would kind of gloss over this stuff, but they would refer to that book. But they glossed over it in a way that was detailed enough for me to know that this is, in fact, a male flower, and the other is a female flower. And more specifically, we have, so it's called a monoecious plant. So you've got, the plant itself is hermaphroditic, so it's both male and female, but we have separate flowers. And that is in contrast to just a regular hermaphroditic flower. It's also sometimes called a perfect flower, where it's both male and female. And the male parts are usually below the female parts, so they can't accidentally fertilize their own flower. And then you have dioecious plants, which there's a specific male plant and a specific female plant. Probably the most common plants like this that everyone would know would be the holly plants. Holly plants are usually either male or female. You know, the little spiky leaves and the red fruits. And then the other plant that's really common is that everyone knows about is marijuana. Marijuana is either male or female. And so if the one that people use to smoke, I think is, I can't remember what it is. I think it's the female one, is the one that has the buds on it that people then smoke. So yeah, it's interesting. So this website right here talks about, you know, it references the scientific literature, but it talked about it in the most obvious way. This was the Missouri wild. Man, I should have had the URL up on here, but it's Missouri's like state website for their own plants, and it looks like it was someone's blog from the 90s, but it actually has really good information. And so it's telling us that these are flower clusters. Each of these little balls is a flower cluster, and it talks about the staminate heads. So these are the stamen, the male flowers, and then these are the female flowers, the pistillate heads, the female flower cluster. And what's really interesting, so this is a monoecious plant. What's really interesting about this is that the male parts are above the female parts. And what that tells us is that even though we saw a bug, an insect, and we saw a bee that was collecting pollen, their main method of pollination is self-pollination by wind. Self-pollination and the pollination of neighbors by wind. So the male part is above the female part. And I saw some stalks that had up to 2 female flowers on one stalk, and then the males would start, but most of them just had 1 female, and then it was just males all the way up. So there was some diversity among the same species in that respect. But this works. You know, I said earlier that it's shaped kind of like it looks sort of like corn, in that these seeds are attached to a little kind of a corn cob, but it's a round corn cob instead of a rod-shaped corn cob. But, you know, this is the way that corn pollinates as well. Corn is mainly wind pollinated. And you've got the male part of the flower that sticks up above the corn, and you have the ears of corn are the female part. So we just eat the female part of the plant. So yeah, some really cool similarities there. So yes, all of our questions are answered. That is the truth about, this plant that I found. So, What's It Wednesday, everybody? I'm not going to do this every week. I'm not going to do a What's It Wednesday every week, but there are a bunch of other What's It Wednesday videos that are actually not plant related. They're all about skulls. Actually, all of the other ones are. But I will do this from time to time when I find a weird thing out in the wild. I'll throw up a What's It Wednesday video. I thought this was fun. I don't know if you guys liked this as much as I did, but I thought it was really cool to do. And it was fun to have all the interactions that I got underneath that video. We had something like 45 people chimed in on what they thought it was, and people were playing the game. They were actually doing it. Sweet gum. Yeah, people were... AA was asking if I was talking about sweet gum. No, this is not sweet gum, but a lot of people thought that it was because it has very similar seed pods. So I'm getting some information about marijuana here. Marijuana has hermaphrodites. Female hemp plant can actually grow male flowers under stress too. That's interesting. It's really interesting that it's when it's stressed. I really like these conditional adaptations that so many organisms have that don't show up very often, even in entire individuals. my wife and I were just talking about this the other night. We were talking about the way that we behave in emergency situations. We were talking about driving in this case. There was a horrible car accident in our not in our neighborhood, but in our city. And she's a nurse, and she helped work on it. And it was, well, she wasn't working on it, but she saw what happened, and it was absolutely horrifying. But there was a guy who ran to the scene of this accident and just immediately opened up a vehicle that was completely in flames. He just dove in there and pulled a guy out who was unconscious. And we were talking about this it's an instinctual drive that we have that gets triggered, where when you're in a crazy situation, you either run away from it. And actually, one of the other drivers that was in this accident, he ran away. His instinct was to run away. It's this fight or flight thing, you know. His instinct was to run away, and I don't know if he came back to the scene later, but he immediately ran away. Maybe it was the accident was his fault, or maybe he there was an accident and then everything was in flames, and so he ran away to get away from his car. But someone else, their instinct was to run towards it and to try and help out. And I think this is just really interesting, because I've been in situations like this before. And it's like you're observing yourself. It's like you are not in control. You're just doing something. And I happen to be one of the idiots that runs in to the scenes. Actually, not always. I actually did. When I was in Las Vegas once, someone was beating up a mascot, and I wasn't very close. There was a lot of other people that were closer that should have been the ones to break it up. And my instincts were to just kind of watch. But in other cases, I've put myself in stupid, dangerous situations where afterwards I'm like, why did I do that? I've broken up dog fights before, like between two dogs. I've also broken up fights between a person being attacked by a dog when I was in Brazil. And all of these times, it was completely instinctual. I was not in control. I was just going and doing it. And I think that's really interesting that we have these adaptations that might not ever even be useful at all in your lifetime, but they're there. And a certain stimuli, certain things will trigger you into action, and you're just doing stuff that makes no sense. And that the marijuana plants can do that too. That's really interesting. That when they're under stress, they will grow both male and female flowers, which allows them to pollinate themselves and to reproduce, even though they might not otherwise be able to find a mate. Which this tells us that for some reason there's an evolutionary pressure for hemp to reproduce sexually and to never self-fertilize unless times are really, really rough. So I think that's cool. That's really cool, in my opinion. Well, thank you everyone for joining in on the live show. This was a lot of fun. So long for now. Stay curious.